What's up, my friends and family? Welcome to another episode of the Warrior Poet Project podcast with my brother, Dr. Dan Engel. Dan, what is happening, man?
Always good to be here with you, brother.
It is, isn't it?
Lots happening.
We've been on a bit of a run together.
Yeah.
Gone down to Peru a couple times, been hanging out, and there's been a couple consistent themes. Obviously, we've been doing a lot of psychedelic medicine work and focusing not only on the journeys that we've been doing, the filming, the documentaries, but also on the scientific application and the clinical trials that are in the field, working on supporting those. And the other theme that has been going around is creating tribe, conscious community, and how that would apply to a larger scale on a societal level. So, you know,
all topics near and dear to my heart too, man.
Why not go for the whole thing here on this podcast?
It's too short to not go for it all.
And dig right in. So you've been really transitioning your focus a lot into using psychedelic medicine as a tool. You're a clinically trained psychiatrist, MD, but working with those medicines to be able to create positive effect greater than would be possible from other methodologies and modalities. Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about how, that journey is evolving for you.
Yeah, the journey that we started taking this past year in April ended up in the Wachuma documentary, and then we went down in July, and we're going to be releasing the ayahuasca documentary. And Don Howard was such a great facilitator of the shared work that we had a chance to experience. And in the midst of all of that, there's been this growing awareness for me and shifting passion in working with clients more on a one-on-one and clinical base to a one-to-many effect, and the opportunity to use the most powerful accelerators of consciousness possible. So the topic of consciousness technologies has come up quite a bit in discussion, particularly between you and I, and what are all the different consciousness technologies that help us essentially awake individually and collectively. And the entheogens are just one part of that whole tapestry. So a lot of times people ask me, like, why am I so into entheogens when there are other things around, and what else am I dipping my feet into? It's a recognition that the entheogens as allies are traditional medicines offered to us straight from Mother Nature for a particular reason. And it's not coincident that they're becoming more and more widely utilized, available, and appreciated. Specifically in the clinical realms, there was this big lull in the 80s and the 90s because everybody got a little bit freaked out by the potency of the entheogens that were coming online in the 60s and the 70s. There were thousands of trials, clinical case reports, just by actually just one person. I mean, thousands and thousands, but Stanislav Grof did a lot of work with LSD psychotherapy, like 4,000 cases. And we can make the correlative comparison too of ayahuasca being done at the Temple of the Way of Light, a place that we both know the founders and appreciate the depth and goodness of the medicine used there. Again, 4,000 clinical cases of people going through the medicine work there, and 2 negative results. 2 out of 4,000 is a pretty darn good batting average. And those 2 not so great outcomes were when people got either mood dysregulated into mania or into psychosis because they didn't let the team know that they had a predisposition because they had experienced those before. So there's the set and setting for everything. As a tool, the entheogens, in my experience, are really unparalleled as far as an accelerator to doing the deep work. Outside of that, float tanks, another thing that you and I share a lot of passion about, meditation, vision quests, fasting, a lot of different, like many of my teachers have said, there's many roads back to oneness. There's many different paths back to healing. And so there's many different paths to awaken our consciousness. an affinity for the psychedelic experience and the soul level work that's happened for me, and witnessing that with friends, family, and clients. It's done in the right way, in the right setting, at the right pacing. It's unparalleled in its efficiency and efficacy to help people reboot and wake up.
Yeah, I mean, that's, one of the reasons that I've been a champion of the path as well. And I think people are starting to catch wind of that. And, as you know, I've had to put out, I'd recently put out a major piece, an article about safety in the use of psychedelics, basic guidelines, 3 pillars of a successful psychedelic experience. Because in a lot of these settings, and we talk a lot about going to the right place and doing it, but with the excitement about psychedelics as they're coming online and people are becoming aware, the opportunity to take them in not ideal conditions with not ideal caretakers are coming aboard. Mm-hmm. I mean, so as demand increases and there's no standardization of care because it's still illegal, you're going to get practitioners who are like bad doctors, and just performing psychic surgeries when they shouldn't. They've never been to med school and they have really no fucking idea what they've done. It's just it's been done to them. It's like, oh yeah, I had someone gave me heart surgery. I could do that to you. Uh-huh. I remember I was awake when it happened. I saw they were in there and they messed with some tubes and they used this scalpel and I got you, bro. And that's kind of what we've seen happen in a few cases. So I think that's something that, really we need to pay a lot of attention to, because all it really needs is for the, draconian forces that want to keep these psychedelic medicines illegal and away from the opportunity to heal, which there does seem to be some external pressure, some unwillingness to look at the positive benefit. I mean, if you look purely at the scheduling of the drugs, all of them say no medicinal benefit, Well, we know that's bullshit. High propensity for addiction. I would be hard pressed to see anybody addicted to a boga. I mean, you'd have to be a real masochistic son of a bitch to be.
That's going to be one unique character.
Yeah, So all of these things, they just don't make sense. They fall and they falter. So the only assumption that makes sense is there's external pressures, but maybe it's just fear, or maybe it's more conspiratorial. But anyways, whatever these forces are that are at play, that are keeping these things illegal, they just need a little bit of ammunition to, rally the troops and keep them buried for even longer. Yeah. I mean, in Amsterdam, all it took was one case of someone taking psilocybin mushrooms and jumping off a bridge. I mean, how many people did mushrooms in Amsterdam for years? Tons and tons of people in not ideal conditions, but someone took some and jumped off a bridge. Boom, psychedelic mushrooms are illegal. They found a loophole and they're still selling psychedelic truffles, they call them. But all it takes is one, and then the legislative body moves in and makes things happen. I mean, you see this not only in psychedelic medicine, but in any kind of case where people want to make something happen. I remember in California, just to use another example of how this legal body can work. In California, carrying nunchucks, like kung fu nunchucks, was a felony.
Whoa.
Like a hardcore felony was carrying nunchucks, whereas carrying a loaded gun was a misdemeanor.
What?
Well, the reason why is because someone, had some nunchucks and they beat the crap out of some kid who was, some legislator's son, and they beat him up with nunchucks. So then nunchucks got escalated to like the highest level of things. So
everybody recognizes Bruce Lee as one of that.
Yeah, exactly. He's scary when he's whipping those things around. But anyways, the point being that it's super important, not just for, the safety and the health of every single individual who's doing this, but it's also a way that the whole movement can get damaged. I mean, anybody doing psychedelics is bearing the weight of, the entire public opinion. And so there's more than just yourself to worry about when you're doing that. I mean, if you want this movement to succeed, we have to all be impeccable.
Super responsible.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing I've always appreciated about you, hermano, is your ability to language the entheogenic experience, the psychedelic experience. And that's a gift. It's kind of like on the level of Graham Hancock. He writes super well about things that are spiritual and etheric and largely difficult to put into words, and because of how many people you reach as well, and the way you describe your experience, people are going to get turned on to. They're going to like, wow, I want a piece of that.
Yeah, I want that.
I want to, please help me find an equivalent or similar way to tune in to the unknown. And i.e., that's really tuning in more to myself,
right,
to really deeply who I am at the core. And so, again, the entheogens as an accelerator to that process, they become romanticized. And that's a dangerous and potentially slippery slope. And the point that you're making about a lot of people pouring medicine when they haven't done the training, I think is extraordinarily on point. It's very similar to that same comparison of somebody. So in med school, there was a rule: see one, do one, teach one, and that has its place. But in the realm of like cardiothoracic surgery, no, it's not like I'm going to see a heart surgery. I'm going to experience one, and then I'm going to teach one. There's a long, drawn out process to that, and the same for the shamanic path. So, people who call themselves healers, I start to get a little curious. Okay,
sure. So
what's your lineage? What's your experience? How long have you been doing this? What's your track record, etc.? If they come from a place of integrity and they have a pretty strong lineage and they seem to be fairly well put together, then I'm going to say, okay, let me come into that laboratory and see what it's like.
Right.
If that laboratory is solid and I have a positive experience, then I'm going to tell my friends and family about it.
Right.
I'm only going to put myself in that laboratory first, so that there are some of us, particularly like you and I and many of our friends, who are going to be the ones that experiment with the different modalities and bring that information back to the tribe. I think like it was Terence McKenna who talked about the definition of a shaman is that person who goes to the edge of the known, steps across that, diving in to experience the unknown and bring that back to the tribe. So being willing to go across into an experience that could be potentially dangerous or probably at bare minimum disorienting, at worst extraordinarily psychologically debilitating. Being willing to do that takes a fair bit of psychological constitution just by itself.
Sure.
And we've been in the realm of exploring and experimenting people who are doing it really well, and that's one of the things that I get super excited about when we talk about formalizing the protocols for people going down this path. And I think it will happen within probably the next decade for a good number of these entheogens to be legalized in the right set and setting, in the right clinical environment, with the right trained practitioners to facilitate clinically, medically oriented psychedelic healing. And just had a great dinner with Rick Doblin of MAPS about 2 weeks ago. And they're now into phase 3 trials. They've just formalized and kind of put online the necessary infrastructure for being able to make medically purified MDMA of a consistent strength and potency with each batch. And in order to have anything medically legal for prescription, you have to be able to make sure that it's of a consistent purity and strength, within every batch. So you can't use other machines that have made other stuff to do that. It's got to be a machine solely purposed for making MDMA. So with the machinery in place, with the clinical trials coming on board, and with the clinical evidence that's already shown how fucking phenomenally effective MDMA is for something that's fairly clinically severe, that we don't have a whole lot of other even really successful methodologies for benefiting, and that's with PTSD. PTSD is one of those things that allopathic medicine kind of goes, it's kind of like cancer. It's like, oh shit, that's a bad one.
Right.
We've got some medications that might help the symptoms, but we're not really sure how to help you best other than to do some cognitive behavioral psychotherapy, maybe some EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And basically, you need alternative stimulation. Usually it was with a light bar, but you can do it with audio stim or with tactile stim. You need different sides of the brain firing at different times to be able to let the fear center rest so that the tracking mechanism is a bit more online to go through and reprocess the traumatic experience. Fairly effective. Sometimes it needs 10 to 20 treatments. And these are like hour to 3 hour long psychotherapeutic sessions. So fairly user intensive. When done in the right set and setting, modest efficacy, maybe 60 to 70%, depending on the trials you look at. Compare that with something like MDMA-assisted psychotherapy that has an 85% success rate with 2 to 3 treatments. Pretty phenomenal. And that's for severe chronic PTSD.
Yeah.
Pretty freaking phenomenal. So those are the early studies that are now getting MDMA online, on board. Psilocybin is now coming into clinical research more and more effectively. Ayahuasca is as well. Not so much here in the States, but it is appreciated abroad. ICEERS is an organization in Spain, kind of like the MAPS equivalent in the States. Iboga has clinical trials for its awesome efficacy in opiate dependency. So each of these has its place, and not every psychedelic is right for every layer of symptomatology. And that's when we get a huge array of tools in our tool belt with really skilled therapists that know when to use which,
Right.
that we get this great likelihood of benefit. And the risk-benefit ratio is extraordinarily in the side of benefit with low risk. And not everybody is going to do, like, for example, with severe PTSD, not everybody's going to do well using ayahuasca first and foremost straight out the gate. We're actually going to be doing an ayahuasca study down at the Temple of the Way of Light this coming year for PTSD. And then we had a good conversation with a mutual friend, Michael, just a few days ago around the importance of creating the right set and setting, but also being able to pace the psychedelic experience. So for some people who are so raw in their fear response, ayahuasca might not be necessarily the right first choice, right? Because you're in a dark setting, and sometimes it's
it's scary as fuck in general.
And it can be like popping off the cork on a champagne bottle, and all of a sudden you get this shit everywhere, and you're like, now what do we do with that?
Right.
So it would be like if you had the opportunity to say, like, open source and make openly available in a good way the right psychedelic progression. It might be just something like doing MDMA assisted psychotherapy.
Or float tanks first.
Float tanks are an amazing first thing to do.
Float tanks, maybe some shamanic breathing, then MDMA, then ayahuasca.
Right.
Like bring them through the spectrum
exactly
in a treatment protocol.
Because you want people to be able to feel safe,
right,
while they're going through this, and be able to come back. Essentially, it's like coming back to your center. Anytime we get freaked out, if we can find our center, we can reconnect with the breath, then the fear will dissipate. Physiologically, the fear will dissipate. You cannot be connected. You cannot be connected with diaphragmatic breathing and be panicked at the same time. It's physiologically impossible, because we're binary beings. Your sympathetic system is on, or your parasympathetic system is on, dominant. You can't have both dominant at the same time. So that's why one of the things that people learn when they have panic attacks, or somebody's fear response is so jacked, if you can train somebody to get in touch with their breath through the breathing work that you're describing, and that really relaxed breathing state, then physiologically they will eventually shift over. Usually it takes a few minutes. Most people don't stay with it that long. They get too freaked out, and they start breathing shallow. The holotropic breath work, that's a different style of breathing altogether, and that's really powerful as an entheogen. We were talking about Stanislav Grof earlier. This guy did 4,000 clinical case sessions with LSD psychotherapy. And then when that became illegal, he wanted to also find another modality that was less psychedelically based. So he came up with holotropic breathwork.
Something that they would have a much harder time making illegal. Breathing.
Right. Try and make that illegal.
Yeah, good luck.
Right?
You were breathing too fast there. We're going to throw you in a cage.
Right.
Keep you from breathing too fast.
We don't want you freaking out. We don't want you going across the veils. We don't want you like waking up.
Right.
Because, again, you can get into the kind of conspiracy theory about why that is. Well, the educational system, it was born from like World War II assembly lines making bomber parts, right? It was great to have minions just making widgets.
Yeah.
And the educational system is largely unchanged since then. Everybody gets the same curriculum. Everybody takes the same standardized tests. Unless you're looking at Waldorf schools and Montessori schools, everybody's doing the same kind of like widget making.
Well, that's getting into, a little bit of building the ideal society. But one other thing I want to touch on is it seems to me that, the preparation work and the integration work are these two really key pieces that, a lot of times are missed, in any kind of work, even if it's just like a casual, mushroom experience that someone wants to have, where it's not a super deep dive, but, they want to do some work. Well, they don't even pay attention to what they eat that day, and then they're like, oh yeah, mushrooms get me nauseous. Well, what'd you have? Oh, I had a fucking In-N-Out burger before I did it. I put it on a pizza. I'm like, you put it on a pizza? Of course you're going to be nauseous. Like, come on, man.
Don't mushrooms go on pizza?
Yeah, exactly. So it's interesting, but it seems to me that if you have one of these conditions, and if we were allowed the freedom to develop that protocol, it could be like, okay, 4 floats, 2 shamanic breathwork sessions, 1 MDMA assisted psychotherapy, then the ayahuasca, and then just go right back down the pyramid the same way, do another MDMA assisted psychotherapy, go back through the holotropic breathing, hit the float tanks in this kind of up and then back modality. And I think that the odds of success in that would be staggering, just staggering, if you were able to take people through this progression and really work to heal them, not just treat the symptoms, not just chase these things all over the place.
Yeah, you're right on with that, man. Integration, I think is the biggest missing piece of the whole puzzle. Oftentimes, particularly in our circle of friends and community, many of us have been psychonauts. We've explored other things prior to coming to the bigger ones like Iboga, ayahuasca, even Wachuma. We've experimented with a few others. So we've been on that process. Many haven't. And with the availability and the information, like through your podcast, through Rogan's podcast, through Graham Hancock's books, through Terrence McKenna's research, there's so much information now that's been out there for a long time, but is gaining another resurgence in this new millennium. Many people are getting super excited, and they hear about people's experience of breakthroughs. People are suffering from pain, emotional pain, physical pain, whatever, for so long, and then they drop into an Aya ceremony, and then they're liberated magically. And that sounds like the best case scenario, and that's also the one potential experience on the whole spectrum of potential experiences.
Right.
And the likelihood, like you just said, of success largely comes from how much you've prepped, who's facilitating it, and what does that look like, and how have you integrated. And so if we're doing the prep work kind of just naturally on our own accord, then we might not really appreciate the super importance of doing the integration work. And I can speak first and foremost from that perspective myself. When I came back from the jungles, and I've told you this story before, I lived in the jungles for a year, and when I came back, it was so and I had gone really deep. I went to live there to study with ayahuasca. I did a lot of ceremonies, and I went so deep, and I had no appreciation for the importance of integration that when I came back, I could not be around other people, like literally, physically, energetically. So I lived in a tent for a year. And most people aren't really going to want to do that or have the time or opportunity to do that. And that was also after doing, close to 100 ceremonies. And not everybody's going to do that many as well. But even one ceremony is important to integrate, because the integration, all three of those, from my perspective, all three of those are equally important. Mm-hmm. Preparation, ceremony, and integration. All three of those stages is equally important. It's if you don't prep well, the likelihood of having a lousy experience is much higher.
Yep.
And on all levels. Have you prepped your body? Have you prepped your mind? Have you prepped your psyche and like the emotional content? Do you know what's potentially going to happen? And then on the integration side, do you have anybody that's your support system to be able to rework and rewire your psychic experience? It was great to catch up with your little sister yesterday, Olivia. I hadn't seen her since we were down with Don Howard doing Wachuma and that experience. And I hope she didn't mind if I called her out on that. But since she was in the film, I figured she would be okay with it. And we were talking about integration. And we had talked about integration then. And she said, when I came back, I knew we had talked about integration, but I didn't know how hard it would be. And the integration is the same for any peak experience. The entheogens are just kind of what we're highlighting now. From a Buddhist perspective, the same thing could be said for enlightenment. And there's a good book called First Enlightenment, Then the Laundry. Right? And essentially that's like, wow, I had this great awakening. And now it's chopping wood and carrying water. It's like back to square one, back to the norm, back to this reality. And what does this mean? And how do I take that peak experience and bring that into my life?
Yep.
That can be really disorienting if you don't have the right support. And you come back to the environment that you had left, and it's the same, including the people.
Except your internal environment is drastically
different.
Altered. And that's one of the issues, and a really good segue to talking about, how it's not only important to think about the individual, but the community, because we are social beings, and you have these peak enlightening experiences. And if everything around you is a completely different frequency designed not only not to support these enlightened superconscious states, but to actively degrade them, which is the case in a lot of our current society, then it's going to be a real challenge. So I think we have the freedom, maybe we can't change all the laws of the land, but that's not necessarily what we need to do. I think we can start creating conscious communities within this structure, these alliances, these groups, these practices, these, volitional attempts to make sure that our environment and these pressures and influences around us are supportive of major growth and change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the integration experience, when we go through, when we go into a peak experience, we have a particular frequency. When we come out of a peak experience, we have a different frequency, right? And it's not, we won't say necessarily higher or lower because it's not a judgment, but it's frequency. Everything's frequency. When we come through that experience and our frequency is different, what's the frequency of the environment? Usually we're connected with our environment in a particular way because resonant frequencies attract resonant frequencies. So if I'm hanging out with, like my friends, my family, my community, we're vibing on a particular level. Otherwise, I wouldn't be hanging out with those people. I would find other people that I was vibing with. So I go through this experience, and on the other side of that experience, I'm different. Nothing necessarily, unless they've gone through a similar experience, nothing in the environment has shifted. If I go home, and this now is the case, that now there's this difference, there's this differential, one of four things is going to happen. I'm going to, through sheer will and perseverance and accessing all my available support, I'm going to be able to maintain my frequency and support my environment to be able to come up and match me now where I am. That's the ideal situation, because I've gone through something and now I'm able to bring that back to the tribe and benefit the collective.
It's like Gandalf on the bridge putting his staff down, saying,
Boom.
I will not change
Right.
my frequency
Right.
to meet
I am so
you.
freaking rock solid in that. Right? Or I don't have the support. I don't have that resolve. Time takes over, and I slowly, bit by bit, come back to the frequency that I was prior to that peak experience. And I'm now matching my environment because now I feel safe and I feel met. Because if you're not feeling met, it can feel fairly lonely. And that's the biggest thing that people talk about on the other side of a peak experience, is they feel alone.
Yep.
Because the environment now doesn't support where they have now gone to. So bit by bit, maybe I lose what I've gained. And I've seen that particularly at Grace Grove. We've seen a lot of people come through our program there, detoxification rejuvenation program, and they go home and they don't maintain the gains because they don't have the support, they don't have a workable integration program, etc. Bit by bit, they go back into old eating habits, psychological patterns, whatever it is, and that comes back down. That's number 2. Number 3 is that these relationships go away. So whatever was in my environment now, its inertia is so static that it won't change. And I'm so solid in my new frequency that I'm not going to change. So then I find a new environment, a new set of friends, a new set of chosen family, a new occupation, a new living situation that is already at the environment level and consciousness level that I choose to maintain. Right? That's choice 3.
I think you mentioned it, and I want to get to choice 4, but there's an important point in there. When you say chosen family, I think that's a concept that is really pretty vital, because there's ingrained in our heads this sense of obligation to certain people, like that we have to subject ourselves to, certain individuals because they are our family. And we had a wonderful dinner with our good friend Ted Decker, who is really, a master in exploring and understanding Christ consciousness and the real teachings of Christ as he understands them. And he said something really, really interesting that partly applies to that. He said, in order to follow me, meaning in order to be a part of the Christ consciousness, you must hate your mother, hate your father, hate your brother. And that word hate is a strong word, but I think in that translation, it means to really, if you're really interested in pursuing consciousness, all of these other things, these special relationships that you think you have, these obligations, you have to be willing to divorce those, your attachments to them, whatever it is, and make volitional choices about each individual. And I think people get trapped in so many situations in these kind of toxic relationships out of some sense of obligation. Yeah, your parents birthed you, awesome, give them gratitude, but it doesn't mean that you have to subject yourself to these lashings of and whatever parts of these relationships that are not good, unless you can maintain adequate defenses. But it's not your obligation. You have a right to your own happiness. You have a right to your new consciousness. You can choose which family you have, and that's okay, and that's for the greater good, not in a mean way, not in a cold way, but out of love for yourself, a ruthless self-love, loving yourself enough to demand that you're willing to do what it takes to get your greatest gains.
That last part that you made is such a vital distinction. And I think you're right on with Ted's description of that. And I actually had a hard time understanding what that meant. I remember reading that a while back. I have to hate my mother and hate my father. I don't get that. And I appreciated his translation as we started talking it through. hate we could translate to attachment.
Yep.
So if I am able to separate my attachment from my mother, my father, my community, etc., then I can more readily put my own mask on first before I look to the service of helping somebody put their mask on second. If we're in a nosedive, I got to get my oxygen mask on first. And the opportunity to come through that out of compassion for all of our relationships, out of gratitude for our parents birthing us, for our community supporting us, deep gratitude, deep appreciation. And I'm not running away to take care of myself because I'm pissed off, because I'm hurt, because I wasn't met, I wasn't loved, because somebody traumatized me. Ideally, we work through that while we're still connected to those people. Sometimes that's really freaking hard to do because ideally that level of healing requires them to acknowledge what they did. But I don't have to wait for somebody else to acknowledge hurting me before I can heal that on my own.
Yeah.
Because at a certain level, I appreciate the fact that only I can give up my power. Now, as children, that's not necessarily the case because children haven't really adultified their own just neurobiology. They haven't matured their own neuroanatomy and myelination of all of the organizational structures to be able to think in these kinds of terms. So we're talking about more from an adult perspective. The ability to appreciate that at our core, I cannot, I'm first person perspective responsible for my own power. And no one at a particular level can do anything to me. And if and that puts our whole paradigm of the judicial system completely on its head. There's some Native American cultures, I don't know if it's a Lakota tradition, I think it was one of the Plains tribes, that I read this example of when there was somebody in the tribe who did something egregious to somebody else in the tribe, like something violent or stole from them or did something like criminal, that the attention didn't go to the victim of that crime. The attention went to the perpetrator out of compassion. The whole tribe rallied around the perpetrator to understand more deeply what was affecting that person. Because only somebody very troubled and hurt and traumatized themselves would perpetrate some criminal act on another. So the support network was first and foremost around the perpetrator. And yes, supported the victim too. But the understanding was that we have our first person perspective ability to recognize that at my core, if somebody's doing something to me, then I am not a victim in that. It's my job to be able to stand up and say that's not right. To take to take my own power and sovereignty back. Now, Nelson Mandela is another great example of somebody who took his power back through a 27-year experience in prison, and coming out of that found compassion and an ability through nonviolent resistance. And you can draw the same comparison with Gandhi and Martin Luther King and so many other people who have found their own strength and reservoir of consistent perseverance in the face of persecution to the extent that was so undeniably remarkable and respectable that it rallied the masses who were not yet at that frequency, and we can call that a frequency as well. So when we do recognize if somebody's done something egregious to us, or maybe we have just now resonated out of our family of origin, like my dad's fond of calling me the wanderer, and we have a relationship that's healed quite a bit as I've come into compassion with ways that I didn't think that he parented me in just the right way.
Right.
And then when I realized he did his absolute best, and he's a remarkable person, and he's very dedicated to his family in his own way, and I might do that in my own way, but I'm my own person, And I've never actually been a father. So how can I actually judge my father if I haven't actually been a father, for one?
Right.
Who am I to judge somebody if I haven't been in that same experience? It's super powerful to come to a place of non-attachment, because then we can really see what's best for us.
Totally. And it's the different, as you're describing, we have everything based on a very low frequency ego-based society, which has judgment for, first and foremost. We're constantly judging ourselves. We're constantly judging others and punishing them based upon these judgments, that kind of Old Testament biblical, nonsense, commit a sin, I smite thee, and that's how it goes. Whereas in that Lakota example, in the conscious example, really the only appropriate response to that is pity, and there's that great power. When I was younger, I never understood that turn the cheek aphorism, and I don't think most people do either. But, in talking with Ted and growing older, if you hit somebody, and they hit you back and they're in a rage and they pound you and pummel you, well, okay, they were stronger than you, but they were just stronger on that physical level. You incited anger, you damaged them, which caused them to have a reaction to go out of their way to do something back to you. If you hit somebody, they smile and turn the other side of their face, how much more badass is that person than you? Like, at that point, you're like, fuck. I'm really
I gave that person all I got, and he just smiled and walked away.
He smiled and turned the other side of his head, like, do it again if you want. That's like what it would be like if we came upon a dragon and tried to punch a dragon in the face, and they just looked at us like, really, motherfucker, you're gonna punch me in the face? Here's another one. It's like that much of a higher level of strength is required in that, and I think that's what the expectations in that tribal example, the expectations are for the victim to be able to rise above that insult and not take it as an insult. I'm sure there's some reparations that the tribe would make. I'm sure that's part of it as well. But the real, the pity in that situation does not go to the victim, because the assumption is the victim is not a victim and can overcome that with their impeccability and strength. But the pity goes to the perpetrator, because that is the appropriate response. Now, does that mean, I've used this example before, does that mean if someone's going to come try to attack my girlfriend, I'm not going to take them out? No, fuck no. I have a right to protect my own, sovereignty. But if someone lobs an insult to me on Twitter or something like that, and I get riled up, that's weakness, in my response. That's not strength. Strength is, smiling and saying, that's an interesting idea that you have there. I'm sorry that you're so angry that you feel the need to do that, and that's a more kind of realistic example of how that works. But in our society, every step of the way, there's things that have seemingly gone a little bit off course because we haven't been pursuing that high frequency. We haven't been in ritual together. We haven't formed truly conscious community. And I think there's out of balance even in the most, these quote conscious communities. I think there's a lack of balance. There's a lack of that yang energy to really be willing to stand up and fight and create change. So
like really train conscious warriors.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I lived in an ashram community for about 2 years, and it was really great for quieting my mind and opening my heart and getting me more spirit centered. Super weak for my body, and it didn't feel super empowering on a physical level or on a world level. I was getting more and more fearful about being in the world because I was so inward and I was so protective of a spiritual frequency that I perceived that I was attaining. And so when we get to build both into the mix, and we do train conscious warriors, because we're all warriors on this path, particularly at this fairly critical juncture as a humanity. Just saw Interstellar, and you and I geeked out on that for a good time, recognizing the brilliance of that movie and the timely message of that movie. Avatar, kind of a similar flavor. Like, what are we doing to the planet? What are we doing as a species? What's our trajectory? you could make the argument, if we don't change our trajectory, that things are going to be in dire straits within our lifetimes. So to be conscious warriors, to be able to right the imbalances, how do we get to show up in a good way? And creating conscious community is one way to do that, to collectivize and marshal all of our resources together to share our message of a desire to live in harmony with nature and live in harmony with one another. And again, these are age-old traditional teachings, core values. And we, as a Western consumptive, corporately oriented society, have lost a lot of that because of the profit margin at the end of the day. And that's a crazy imbalance that's happened very recently in our human evolution, fairly quickly. In the last just few hundred years has that really come up online. It's always been a little bit of that hierarchy. The king, if you've got a greedy king, he's going to tax everybody and want to be like top dog. But the societies that have lasted for long periods of time, like Chavin, that you and I have gotten really connected to, and these different pulses of consciousness, have largely been instilled by common values and living in harmony with one another. And one of the things that helps us do that, because we get to heal the underlying program that took us out of balance, are the entheogens. And being able to know how to access those, having coaching and preparation, again, setting for the experience, and then integrating it on the other side. And The Island is another book that we've shared some affinity for.
Yeah.
So The Island is like your how-to manual to create conscious community. And the
Conscious Society.
Conscious Society, right.
And
Society at large.
Island is a book by Aldous Huxley that I review on my blog.
Super good. And then The Fifth Sacred Thing is a how-to manual once that society's been created, to be able to, through conscious nonviolent resistance and really appreciating how everybody is interconnected on this level of human frequency, humanity, how to be able to maintain our core values when our entire society is threatened. Two amazingly potent views of what is possible. And I think we have the opportunity to create that. Whether we do it on just a small scale or we're able to really create it on a big scale has yet to be seen. I'm super freaking stoked to create that on a small scale, and I can't think of anything that I'm more dedicated to. Everything for me is pointing in that direction.
Yeah, likewise. And I think when people think about that, in creating your own tribe, which is something that we're in the process of doing ourselves, and if I think thinking about society and the laws and all of that, it can be a little bit overwhelming to kind of worry about just the macro. But if you imagine that you're able to create, a tribe of 100 people, and it's not just collecting only the people that are just like you and think exactly that way, but drawing in different individuals that have their own strengths and their own weaknesses. You don't want everybody to be homogenous in a tribe. That doesn't make
genetic diversification is super helpful.
And skills, diversification and personality diversification. And so when we think about this, it's not like, okay, well, how many people from this little niche can we get together and gather, which is, I think, one of the areas that a lot of these communities have gone wrong is they're collecting the same person, over and over again. Like, ideally, you have some people holding down that far end of consciousness, that can really provide ritual and provide ceremony and be that anchor for the tribe. And then you have these other people who have a proclivity for massive influence in society, whether they're professional athletes or Wall Street bankers, and they're really, or politicians or people on this other side, just dealing in the middle, in the fray of mainstream society, so that in combination, the super conscious of the tribe and those people can meet and mingle and each share and impart some of those values upon each other, so that everybody is included in this group, and everybody falling in between with different skills and different values. And, if everybody had that system, then it's this kind of self-reinforcing unit. If everybody was a part of one of these groups, then, you'd be able to catch these kind of delinquent events and be able to support people in these variety of different pathologies and sufferings and depressions and all of these things. You'd have that built in. So my advice would be for people interested in creating this kind of tribe. I mean, think about the rituals that'll bond you together. Think about, the agreements that you have amongst each other, but don't think that you have to collect only the same person over and over again. Like reach out, find those people who can add certain strengths and see what strengths that you can complement them with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like the movie Divergence.
Mm-hmm.
There were these different factions, and where did it go wrong? Well, there was such like the aristocracy desire to keep everybody very homogenized within these factions, within these groups, and of course there was this sinister plot. So you had good and evil, and all that plays out. But at a thematic level, it's really helpful to have people who represent different aspects and strengths of the human potential, all collectivizing their skills for the benefit of the unit. Mm-hmm. You don't have. It's better to have a diverse group of people when you're looking just for like the likelihood of sustainability, that are collectivized around a core set of values. Like my strengths and weaknesses are different than your strengths and weaknesses. What I can bring to the table is different than yours. But yet I'm still as equally invested to the survival of the unit as a whole.
Right.
So we come together with this really deep desire in this human experiment, because that's essentially what we are in the midst of. We're each individually in the midst of this human laboratory. I only know really what's happening in my own little experiment. I don't know what's happening in your experiment. I can only see that from the outside. I get flavors of it when I feel your heart, when I feel your emotional framework and your spiritual kind of essence. I can get a sense of it, but still at the end of the day, I'm only primarily understanding and responsible for my own little human experiment. So when we desire to put our human experiments together, then it gets really rich. And super fun. Yeah. I mean, like at the core, we're social beings built for both survival and play.
Yeah.
And most people now, when you look at that seesaw, are so much in fucking survival, they don't even know how to reorient their play and recapture their play, resurrect their play. That's why I think it's really helpful to hang out with kids.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why people like dolphins so much.
Totally.
Because they've
sex and play.
Yeah, they've gotten to the point where survival is pretty easy for them. They're really fucking good at catching fish. Like that's not that difficult.
And they don't have any predators.
And nobody's messing with them because they're too smart and they're too fast and they're so except for humans,
right?
They have to deal with that, but. So they spend most of their time probably as humans should be spending most of our time because, hey, guess what? We're also really good at catching food and we're also really smart and we've also defeated most of our natural predators, so we probably should be a lot more like the dolphins and spending most of our time in play. I mean, that's really what humans should be doing. Playing in love, playing in, play, just play.
Please, it helps everybody.
Yeah. So at least getting a little closer to that makes sense because that's really what we're here to do.
Yeah, when you look at and science even shows that. When you look at the longevity practices, what are the things that people do that help them live the longest? They laugh, they exercise, they play, and these are things that we can just naturally. It's not like taking the best supplement. It's not like taking the new latest craze, fat loss pill.
Yeah.
Or HGH, human growth hormone. It's not like taking all the new fancy shit. It's really coming down to basics. Eat well, get good sleep, fast from time to time. Like don't eat from time to time, which is also evolutionarily kind of built into the program because we didn't always have food. So electively go without food for like a day a week or a few days a month or something like that, or 16 hours a day in a given calendar, and play. Because it really helps people remember like the core potential of the human experience.
Yeah.
And the cultural program has really gotten out of balance the other way. And that's another thing that I always appreciate so much about being in the collective here is that one of the most common messages about like total human optimization from the On It platform of core values is play, exercise, build your body as like a strong human temple, and let's have these kind of conversations about how we can also expand our consciousness, open our heart, be able to share collectively.
Yep, that's the whole picture, really. And that's and I think one of the key things, add on it is that we understand that it's difficult to play when you're in pain. Mm-hmm. It's difficult to play when you don't have any energy at all, and you're just down. That lightness, that spirit. When I think back to the happiest times that I've had, it's when I carry a certain lightness, and then every situation has an opportunity for laughter to break out, for enjoyment, enthusiasm, passion. It's when that lightness is present, and so much of that is dependent on physical things. And now, of course, your mind can overcome that, and no matter what's going on, your mind can get to that state. And we all know people that are like that. We know people who are, just coming out of suffering what would be the devastating tragedy for some, and they're still just as light. And so we all know those examples, but that's difficult for most of us. So, why not take care of the body? Why not make it a little easier on our minds? But in the absence of that, also at the same time, work on our minds, work on these practices, work on our ethos, so that even if we are a little bit off, we can still carry that lightness with us. Because that's the key, that's really where the magic is. There's the fight, and then there's the magic. There's a lot to fight for here in the world, but you can get too caught up in fighting every day, fighting to pay the bills, fighting for a better society, fighting for your family, and take this kind of just this huge burden upon yourself, and look at yourself. I'm just a soldier. I'm in the shit. I got to keep fighting. Well, why? It's so people can play, including yourself. Like, give yourself that opportunity to be light, to have some fun, to enjoy life. And that's really where the magic is. That's what makes it all worthwhile. But you got to take care of the body, and then you got to work on the mental practices, and you got to get over your fears. And that's another great thing that the psychedelic medicine is really good for, is helping you push past your fears, because that really limits play as well.
So right on, man. And I think that's a huge draw, whether people are conscious of it or not. Something is limiting me from my ultimate happiness. Mm-hmm. Something is preventing me from having that spark, maintaining that light, having that levity in life. I can feel it. Maybe I don't know what it is. Maybe I do know what it is, and I haven't been able to shed it. How can I do that in order to get to where I really choose and see myself potentially getting to at a level of joy, unconditional positivity, faith, optimism, inspiration, love, celebration, all of these things that we know is our potential, and we get inspired when we see that in others, and we're like, how did that person get there? I choose to have some more of that in my life. Mm-hmm. And doing that deep shadow work, like when you asked me Friday night when we were here on a podcast to open up the gym, it was like, I think you asked me, it was like a 30-second soundbite on like, given everything that I've studied up to this point, what's like the best thing to tell people? I was like, oh, that's a good question. I was like, okay, where do I start? And it came down to working with your shadow.
Right.
Really being able to go into that darkness, going into whatever it is that we would shame or guilt or try and deny, act like isn't there. We don't even want to acknowledge it when we look in the mirror, much less show it to anyone else. Be able to go into that place. Be able to explore that. Open up to that. Get curious about that, because that is a mountain of potential growth, teaching, being more integrated as a whole person. And when we can use our weaknesses as strengths, then we start to become invincible, ever powerful. And that gets into that bridge between both our activation, our kind of activist, being a conscious warrior in the world, and our play. When we've released some of that shadow material in order to integrate it into a more whole self, then we're more able to, I think, see how to balance being both a warrior and a poet, which is one thing that I really appreciate about just the title of of this discussion series, and you really do. And this isn't just because I'm on your show and I'm giving you kudos. I've gotten to know you as a really good friend and brother, and I really consistently appreciate that about you, is being able to balance those two. And I think that's one of the things that you and I have shared along the path, is that desire to go into the shadow and really get curious about what's there.
Yeah, to seek that, knowing that it'll be okay on the other side, and just to push those. I remember I had a mini breakthrough the other day when there was a cockroach, and I was about to set up a meditation space, and I saw a cockroach in the corner of the room. And I don't like bugs at all. That's not my fucking thing.
I can attest to that. I've seen you in the jungles.
And I was thinking, I was just about to meditate, so I don't want to smash a cockroach right before I'm meditating. It just felt wrong. And normally I would get like some kind of jar of some sort and put it over it and slide the paper under it and then remove it from the room. That I didn't see any jars, and I just wanted to get to it. And I knew that this was a test, kind of like when I was on Wachuma. It was a test to see if I could just pick this thing up in my hand and let it outside. Well, of course, I go to do that, and the cockroach scurries immediately into the corner of the room where it was nestled right underneath a spider web. So I'm thinking, oh, fucking great. Cockroach and a spider web. Perfect. Of course it's right. And it's just like chilling there, like, nope, not going to go anywhere. You want to get me? You got to get me right through this spider web. I'm like, okay. So I like steel my nerves, like take a few deep breaths, knowing that, there's nothing to fear about this cockroach. It's not going to do anything to me. And if I allowed that fear to win, it was mastering some part of my own omnipotence. It was stealing some part of my power by giving it to that and saying, you have power over me because I'm afraid of this scenario. So I said, all right, I got to do it. So I reach my hand down and I go to pick up the cockroach and I get it in my hand, and all of its legs at once just go in my hand. I dropped it. I was like, shit, fail, part one. I was like, and it scurries right back to that same corner, like went like a homing device, right back to the same spot. It's like, all right, listen, I gotta make this happen. Like, I gotta figure this out. I can't give my power to this cockroach. And I immediately, after that happened, I was like, oh shit. I looked around again for another jar. I didn't see a jar, thankfully. It's like, all right, I'm gonna do this the right way. So I went down and I really committed. Put both hands down, and I shooed the cockroach from the corner into my other hand. And as soon as it got into my hand, it just kind of chilled, just hung out. I was like, oh yeah. Put my other hand on top, and then took it outside and let it off in the bushes. And that may seem incredibly trivial, that little thing, But I think, and it's a message that I've given here a lot, anytime you push past any of your little fears, any of these self-limiting beliefs, there's a certain empowerment that comes from it. It says, I am a powerful being, and I can use my mind to overcome whatever little trivial thing is bothering me, because that was a tangible thing. It was a bug that I was afraid of. But all the time there's parasites in our own mind that we have that very same power to let either limit us, make us afraid, defeat us, or overcome with our own intent and our own really limitless power of our own mind. And so I would say, anytime you get an opportunity to do something like that, to push past one of your irrational fears, fucking do it, And that could be, a really well-intentioned and crafted psychedelic experience, or it could be something tangible like that, understanding when there's danger and when it's just fear, when it's just your own mind or some pattern in your mind that you want to break, some little addictive thing that you're giving yourself permission for, just saying no to that. No. Not going to do that. All these little victories add up and add to our own personal power, and in doing that, give the best opportunity to live that optimized life, to live that life full of play and bliss and love and laughter and joy and fight, and the good fight.
Oh. Yeah, those little victories. That's a great description.
Yeah,
because we get to celebrate all those victories, and how it always feels good to come through something that we didn't think we could do, to push beyond a perceived limit or limitation, and then get to see really how far are we able to go, And there's so many different experiences, whether it's physical limitations and like getting in the gym and going a little bit further. For me, there was a similar experience in swimming. I got into swimming for a while, and I thought it was huge that I was able to swim 45 minutes nonstop. And I was freaking tired, and it was a certain number of laps. And then there was a guy that came over to the Grove, and he's like, and he was freaking ripped. I was like, dude, what do you do? And he goes, I swim every day up in like Lake Michigan, wetsuit and all. I'm like, wow, sweet. He goes, yeah, it's about an hour and a half, 2 hours. I'm like, whoa. You swim for an hour and a half straight, nonstop? Doubled anything that I was doing at that point. I was like, holy Nikes. And then the next day, I swam for an hour.
Yeah.
And the day after that, I swam for an hour and 10 minutes. Day after that, so but like just a little over a week, I was at an hour and a half. like Banner with the 4-minute mile. I mean, it was this perceived limitation. And as soon as somebody else just like crushed what I thought was my limit, I was like, wow, obviously that's not my limit.
Right.
What is my limit? And how can I go beyond it?
Yep.
Victories. Little victories. Massive.
That's it. Well, good luck, everyone, with all your little victories. Lando, tell us about a little victory you're going to have coming up here soon. Do you even have a microphone?
No. Here's my microphone now.
Welcome, Orlando, to the show. Tell us about a little victory you're going to do this weekend, Lando. That's our homework. Everybody's homework is a little victory.
Bingo.
Well, I'm trying to gain some mass, so I'm gonna add some weight to that bar.
Add some weight to the bar is Lando's little victory. I like that, brother. Dan, little victory for you this weekend?
This weekend. Well, we may go wake surfing this weekend. Dynamite. I've done that once before. I was okay for a first day. It was okay. I want to do at least 5 minutes on the wake surf. I want to get 5 minutes, like just nail it, and then start doing some tricks. Physical little victories. I can't think of anything emotionally that's scary or psychically that's limiting right now.
You've been doing a lot of work. So 5 minutes on the wakeboard, on the wake surf is fine for you.
All right.
For me, my little victory is I massively overate yesterday, and it was fucking delicious. It was Thanksgiving. I enjoyed the shit out of that. But today, I'm trying to fast. So my little victory is going to be to actually stick with that and just not eat any food today. Because I know it's going to come around 4 o'clock and like, yummy, hot food. Yeah.
That's a great victory, dude.
Yeah.
That takes will,
yeah,
right? Consistent will.
That's it. All right, everyone. Take a little victory. Make it happen. Little victories add up to big victories in the campaign of our life. So much love to you all. Dr. Dan, thanks for coming, my brother. Always a pleasure. All right.
Totally.
Peace.